The whole world has eyes on the military situation in Iran and the rest of the Middle East. Some people will remember the 2014 peace deal between the United States and Iran negotiated during the Obama administration. Others might remember the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, when the United States backed Saddam Hussein's Iraq against Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. And still, others might remember the Islamic Revolution of 1979, which birthed the Islamic Republic of Iran. But the origins of the 2026 war between the United States and Iran can be traced long before that, to a decision by the United Kingdom and America to interfere in the internal politics of Iran over 70 years ago. On March 7, 1951, Hajj Ali Razmara, the Iranian Prime Minister, was assassinated at the Shah Mosque during a memorial service. Later that month, the Iranian Parliament, the Majlis, voted to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, which had allowed Iranian oil to be completely controlled by a single British company for about 40 years. The oil company had invested millions of pounds in building refineries, roads, and ports in exchange for absolute control of the exploration and sale of Iranian oil. The British government owned 51% of the AIOC, which is today known as British Petroleum or BP, and took home double the amount of revenue from Iranian oil as the Iranian government. Also, the company and the British government protected their interests in ways which were detrimental and disadvantageous to the Iranian populace at large. For example, if an Iranian wanted to obtain a business license in the oil-rich province of Khuzestan, he couldn't get that license from Iranian authorities. Only the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company could approve it, a blatant abuse of the sovereignty, rights and opportunity of the Iranian government and people in their own country. On April 28, 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh, leader of the National Front, which was the largest party in the Iranian parliament and a champion of nationalism, was elected as Prime Minister of Iran. For him, the nationalization of Iranian oil was essential for a free and independent Iran. On the 19th of June 1951, Mossadegh's government had taken over the assets of the refinery in Abadan, the largest in the world at the time, and was celebrated around Iran. Mossadegh asked the Iranian workers to refrain from any actions that might provoke the British and promised to compensate the British government for any confiscated property, but the British government refused all offers. As of 1951, the British Empire, just like the French colonial empire, following the resources spent during World War II, was rapidly shrinking and did not want to let go of one of its most prized assets. The British Navy blockaded Iran's oil, stopping several Iranian tankers in the Gulf, and all major international oil companies joined Britain in the boycott of Iranian oil in order to send a strong warning to any other countries that might think of doing the same. So, from the moment Iran nationalized its oil, it couldn't sell it. British diplomats and intelligence agents in Iran then began plotting the removal of Mossadegh from power. In July 1951, Avril Harriman arrived in Tehran, sent by President Truman, to broker a deal between the United Kingdom and Iran over the oil impasse. The Truman administration sympathized with the Iranian position on the matter and privately asked the British government to agree to a fairer and more reasonable position on the sharing of the revenue from Iranian oil, but the British government of Clement Attlee flatly refused. Publicly, they showed tacit support for the British government, mainly due to their attacks from the Republicans in Congress, who accused the Truman administration of being soft on the threat of communism, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy, the infamous leader in the hunt for communist sympathizers in the United States. The Soviet Union had maintained a presence in Iran since the Second World War, and there was a concern in American diplomatic circles that it could replace Britain as the major power in Iran, especially as the Communist Tudeh Party began to grow into a larger political force in Iran. President Truman rebuffed British appeals for cooperation in a military campaign to overthrow the Mossadegh government, which came after Winston Churchill won the October 1951 snap elections to become Prime Minister once again, not just because of their disagreement on the fairness of Britain's position and the potential downside of American involvement in political affairs in the region, but also because America was already engaged in the Korean War. Based on what we know today about America's misadventures in the Middle East since that time, President Truman's administration's instinctual misgivings about involvement in Iran's internal affairs has proven to be historically correct and well ahead of its time. In Iran, The British diplomats were already manipulating the various political powers within the country once known as Persia. In 1941, the British government had installed Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the new Shah of Iran, replacing his father, Reza Shah Pahlavi, believing that they could control the 22-year-old and use him to protect their interests in Iran. He was basically confined to his palace with his wife and pets. Mossadegh had an uneasy relationship with the Shah and believed he should only be a symbol of unity for Iran and not its ruler, leading to a political fight between the supporters of the king and his prime minister. The biggest supporter of the prime minister at the time was Ayatollah Kashani, a popular Islamic cleric who was one of the few Ayatollahs who mixed religion and politics and was a strong supporter of the nationalization of Iranian resources, as opposed to the majority of the Islamic clergy who supported the Shah. Without the support of the Ayatollah, Mossadegh's nationalization agenda would not have been possible due to Kashani's huge following in Iran. Mossadegh believed in the separation of politics and religion. In July 1952, after the Ayatollah's support forced the Shah to reappoint him as prime minister following a dismissal, Mossadegh refused to appoint non-religious cabinet ministers. Ayatollah Kashani then withdrew support from the prime minister, and the Communist Tudeh party members then moved to support him, which Mossadegh allowed. This political realignment between Mossadegh and the communists in Iran put him at odds with American global interests at the worst possible time. The British, in the meantime, had been aggressively planning a coup to depose Mossadegh, who discovered the plot in October 1952 and severed all ties with the United Kingdom, closing their embassy in Tehran. In November 1952, the British government visited Washington, D.C. to convince the American government that Mossadegh should be deposed in a coup. It was perfect timing. Dwight Eisenhower had just been elected president in a landslide, bringing Republicans back into the White House for the first time in 20 years. The Republican Party had always been fiercely anti-communist in the US, and with Mossadegh's political accommodation with the communists in Iran, the British government of Winston Churchill had gained an ally in their quest to remove the Iranian prime minister. With the Dulles brothers appointed to lead American foreign policy in January 1953 and the death of Joseph Stalin in March 1953, putting Soviet policy in disarray at the time, the British-American covert planning of the coup to strike at the heart of the government of the old Persian Empire went into high gear. On the 4th of April 1953, $1 million was sent to the CIA station in Tehran to finance the payroll of a multifaceted campaign. Journalists were bribed to write anti-Mossadegh articles in Iranian newspapers. Operatives pretending to be communists printed anti-Islamic leaflets to various clerics, threatening them. Also, the British-led boycott of Iranian oil had largely bankrupted the Mossadegh government and made the larger populace of Iranians very poor, leading to unrest. The supporters of Ayatollah Kashani were taking advantage of this situation in their efforts to bring down the government. In May 1953, Mossadegh wrote a private letter to President Eisenhower asking for financial assistance, warning him that if his government fell, the communists would take over in Iran. The letter was ignored for a month and then the request rejected before the CIA circulated the request letter and Eisenhower's reply across Iran, leading to the public humiliation of Mossadegh. The CIA coup in Iran was nicknamed Operation TP Ajax, and it was led by the head of covert operations in the Middle East, Kermit Roosevelt, son of the former American president, Theodore Roosevelt. It was scheduled to be carried out on August 15, 1953, with Mossadegh's government on the verge of collapse. Whilst the Americans did not like the Shah, doubting his confidence to lead the nation, they needed him to provide legitimacy of the coup being in appearance an Iranian-led one, but he in turn did not trust Kermit Roosevelt. In order to convince the Shah that the British and American governments were behind the proposed coup, Kermit Roosevelt arranged for the BBC World Service Radio to change their standard broadcast wording from "It is now midnight" to "It is now exactly midnight." The Shah was still not convinced about the success of the proposed August 15th coup and left for a resort on the Caspian Sea without first signing the two edicts that the CIA needed to provide legitimacy for the coup. One of the edicts was to order the arrest of Mossadegh. The other was to make General Fazlollah Zahedi, the man the Americans had chosen as their candidate, the new prime minister in his place. The Iranian monarch's misgivings about the coup turned out to be correct, as its plans were leaked to Mossadegh's loyalists in the army, who foiled it, by arresting several army officers involved in its execution. General Zahedi escaped capture and went into hiding, while Kermit Roosevelt and his fellow CIA agents made their way to a safe house to hide out in. On August 16, army units loyal to the Prime Minister were deployed throughout Tehran, while his civilian supporters took over the city streets and began destroying statues of the Shah. The Shah left the Caspian Sea resort, moving to Iraq to seek refuge. The CIA, however, knowing that Mossadegh's grip on power was still weak, together with their Iranian collaborators, began planning their next move. Supporters of Ayatollah Kashani did not come out onto the streets in condemnation of the coup like Mossadegh's supporters, but members of the Tudeh party did. They destroyed the property of anyone deemed to have supported the failed coup. Both Mossadegh's supporters and the communists asked the Shah to abdicate, and no denouncement of that request came from the Prime Minister, which looked to the public that he was in support of such a request. The protests had also disrupted businesses in Tehran in the search for anti-Mossadegh supporters. Ordinary Iranians who stayed home didn't participate in the demonstrations, and wary of a communist takeover of the nation became apprehensive. Most of the army's senior officers remained loyal to the Shah and didn't want an Iranian republic. The CIA saw their opening and took full advantage. On the 18th of August, they got their Iranian collaborators to pose as Mossadegh supporters and communists and begin attacking Americans. The American ambassador to Iran, Lloyd Henderson, meets with Prime Minister Mossadegh and threatens that if the Iranian government could not guarantee American lives, he would be forced to ask all Americans to leave Iran. Mossadegh then makes a strategic mistake. He asks his chief of police to disperse his supporters in the streets. Hundreds of communists who are members of the Tudeh party are arrested and jailed. The only thing that had prevented the coup from proceeding as planned had been his supporters in the streets. Mossadegh had unwittingly removed the only barrier left in the coup's path to success. On the 19th of August, supporters and army units under the control of the CIA pour out onto the now empty streets of Tehran and other cities and begin organizing anti-Mossadegh protests. They advance to Mossadegh's residence and begin a military assault on it, forcing the Prime Minister to escape via a back entrance. Forces loyal to Zahedi seize Tehran radio and declare him the new Prime Minister of Iran, and Mossadegh surrenders to them. The CIA sends Major General Norman Schwarzkopf, whose son would lead Operation Desert Storm in Iraq almost 40 years later, over to Iraq to convince the Shah to return home, and he agrees. However, the real winner of the 1953 CIA coup would turn out to be Ayatollah Kashani, as he showed that his support was pivotal to ruling and maintaining power in Iran, as proved by Mossadegh's downfall. When Ayatollah Kashani died in 1962, one of his supporters, Ayatollah Khomeini, started a movement that would eventually lead to the downfall of the Shah during the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic that still exists today. The pivotal role of the CIA in the events of 1953 would be replicated in the years to come, and the rise in prominence of the post-World War II spy agency would come under the leadership of its first civilian director and younger of the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles.